Hi guys, welcome to A&B Homemaker, a place where we are redefining the modern homemaker through recipes, thoughts, ideas, and so much more. And today I am excited to share some of my thoughts with y'all. So I was going through my normal Bible study and I was reading through the book of Exodus, and I was reading a story that a lot of people are familiar with where God comes to Moses in the form of a burning bush. And he says to Moses, I'm sending you back to Egypt so that you can tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And I was reading through this passage, specifically Exodus chapter 3, verses 9 through 12. And again, super popular story. And when God is telling Moses he's going to go back, and Moses is telling God, like, I can't, like, why would they believe me? How would they even know that I'm the person that you're sending? Like, why me? This doesn't even make sense. I'm not the person for the job. And so God tells Moses that you will know that it is I who have sent you when you return to this mountain and you worship me. And that really got me thinking and asking the question of, why are we free? And so as I was thinking about that question, and as I was thinking about just the story of the creation of the nation of Israel, I started to go back because, of course, the story starts in Genesis. And we see in Genesis that God made a promise to Abraham, saying that I'm going to make you the father of many nations. And those nations are going to inherit lands that I'm going to give to your descendants. And the land's going to be flowing with milk and honey. And we see that the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob continues to remind us of this covenant agreement and continues to let us know that this is still going to come to pass. And so eventually we see that one of Jacob's sons, Joseph, ends up separated from the family. He goes through this long journey of lots of twists, lots of turns, and eventually he ends up in Egypt. And eventually during his time in Egypt, he becomes one of the rulers of Egypt that is leading and helping to save the people through a famine. And it's this famine that helps take Jacob and the rest of his children and move to live with Joseph in Egypt. And it is in this place that God grows this small family into an entire nation. And so we see that that does not happen through the most pleasant of means by any stretch of the imagination. We see that that happens because eventually the descendants of Jacob go from being a part of the ruling class with Joseph and being under Joseph's protection and Joseph's favor with Pharaoh, and they eventually become slaves in Egypt. And they are in Egypt and they are slaves for over 400 years. And it is 400 years, generation after generation, of being beaten, of being controlled, of even having their children murdered because Pharaoh wanted to make sure that he can maintain his control and maintain his control over their population. That's also generation after generation of praying out to God, generation after generation of calling out to be saved, to be helped, to be taken out of this miserable situation, only to have no response and no God in sight. And now, after all of this time, we see that Moses is coming back and God is sending Moses to free God's people. And this is interesting because Moses himself had left Egypt. And so a lot of us are familiar with Moses, especially if you saw the classic movie, The Prince of Egypt. We've all seen it. We know that the time when Moses was born was a time when Pharaoh had sent out a decree to have all of the male Hebrew infants murdered. And it was Moses' mother who decided to hide him. And she hid him for as long as she could. And when she just couldn't hide him anymore, she made an ark for him and she sent him down the river. And it was during his trip down the river that Pharaoh's daughter saw him, took him in, and raised him in the palace. And so he grew up as a part of the royalty in Egypt. However, as an adult, he ended up murdering a man and therefore fleeing Egypt so he didn't have to lose his life for the life that he took. And so it's after fleeing Egypt that he ends up in the desert. And so Moses has now found refuge and a whole new life in the desert, away from his people, away from the Hebrews, and away from the Egyptian family that raised him. And so that is where we come into the story where God is now meeting Moses, telling him, I'm sending you back to the place that you left. And I'm not only sending you back, but I'm going to send you and command you to go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. So now, decades later, we see that God is going to reveal why Moses was able to escape death as an infant, why he was able to escape the punishment of death for the murder that he committed. And all of these things had come together for such a time as this and for a purpose that God had in plan long before Moses even knew about it. And so we see that God has heard the Israelites cry. He has seen their oppression. He has seen the abuse, and he is sending someone in to save them. And it was just a reminder to me that in all of this, because being saved is good, being taken out of oppression is good, but that even when God is freeing someone, he is still doing it with a purpose. That the purpose of freeing the Israelites, the purpose of bringing them out of Egypt, was so that they could worship God. That God does not do, we don't serve a God who does anything out of happenstance or just because. But everything God does, it is done with intention and it is done with purpose. And that really made me think, yet again, why are we free? If God would free the Israelites out of Egypt for the purpose of worshiping him, why are we free? And so when I was asking that question about why are we free, it really made me take a look at the world we're living in today and all of the things going on in society and all of the things that people are asking to be free from. We've got people who are asking to be free from a pandemic, free from being forced to wear masks, free from being physically distant from the people and the places that they love, free from being fearful of coming into close contact with people, freedom from social injustices, freedom from racial injustices, freedom from being nervous about going for a run in your neighborhood or being nervous about what may happen if you look like you don't belong in a particular place or a particular space. There are so many things that people are calling out to God, asking for freedom from all of these very real and very legitimate oppressions. However, looking at this text, it reminds me that even when the freedom is good, God still has a purpose tied to it. And so there are people calling out for freedom, countless people calling out for freedom from all kinds of circumstances and all kinds of situations. And even though the oppression is real, even though the pain is legitimate, even though the need for freedom is very much a real thing, God's purpose tied to the freedom is also real too. And I think that this is most clear when we look at God's plan to save us from sin. And so we see that for God to love the world, that he sent his only son to die on a cross as the ultimate and final payment for the debt that we owed for our sins. And it is this payment that he paid that freed us from the bondages of sin, but it also came with a purpose. Jesus died on the cross so that we have the freedom to worship God, to fellowship with God, so that we have the freedom to teach and to disciple other people about the God that loved them so much that he sent his only son to die for them too. And so in this, as I'm looking at all of the ways that God has shown himself to be an intentional God, the ways that God has shown himself to make sure that anything he does, including freeing people, is tied to a purpose, it made me ask, why are we free? And so as we are looking for God to free us from all of these very real situations that are going on in the earth right now, I have to ask, what is the purpose that God has tied to the freedom that you are looking for? What are you going to do that is going to honor and going to glorify God once you are free? And so I will leave you with this. Why are you free?